what even is a proper remake when it comes to video games? What is a respectable remake that pleases everyone? I ask this because after seeing more of the Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater remake, I have to say, for me personally, in many cases, maybe not all, I do think this is what I would like to see from more developers. Remakes that are incredibly faithful to their original works and only tweak and change the things that need changing. The original Resident Evil remake for GameCube. Uh, to this day, that's still one of the best examples I can think of a really good remake that does make a lot of changes, especially to its level design, the way the mansion in that game was redesigned, the way the dialogue was made to be less terrible and go down a bit smoother. And it does all of that. It makes lots and lots of changes to enemies, to items, puzzles, all kinds of things. Even adds a few new elements here and there. But it manages to do all of that without really upsetting the core appeal of that game. It still feels like Resident Evil. It never, the reason people celebrate that remake so much is because, not only was the original PlayStation 1 version of the game something that had a lot of room for improvement, even if it was a relatively groundbreaking game when it came out, that GameCube remake just blows it out of the water, not just graphically, but the way they redesigned it, the way they redesigned the mansion and redesigned the pacing and structure of that game and made it more robust, a bit more expanded, but without taking away what made it so good in the first place. They already had released a pretty large number of Resident Evil games up to that point, and that remake was basically them just perfecting that first generation of Resident Evil games, that tank control style. To this day, that's probably the best Resident Evil game ever made in that classic control style with the pre-rendered 2D backgrounds. Like, that's still the best one, the most refined and perfected game in that lineup of that series. So I feel like that's a good example of a really good remake. But, in some cases, like the Snake Eater remake, when there are so many elements to the original game that are so perfect, that are so obviously it's a subjective thing because it's a Kojima game. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there I know there are lots of people who don't want this Snake Eater remake to be too faithful to the original, especially some annoying people out there who are oh, they left the Eva fan service stuff in there. They didn't cut that out, and you can peep on you can press the shoulder button and peep on Eva's boobies and her booty while she's getting dressed or changed. It's like, it's fun, guys. It's just a fun, quirky feature in a game full of fun, quirky features. It's an homage to old James Bond films and stuff. What's the problem? But there are people, of course, there's always going to be a certain majority of people that complain about stuff like that these days. And, it's annoying because it's everything, man, all the little things like that add up to what made the original game fun and what made it special, when I found out that the snake versus monkey mini game from the original, which was such a weird little obscure thing to have in the game, in the subsistence, I think it was the subsistence version. I don't think it was the launch version of Snake Eater, but that was such a cool, fun little mini game. And I was shocked when I saw that Konami was keeping that in there. And to top it all off, they're actually building an entirely new online multiplayer mode from scratch. Mode just for this remake called Fox Hunt. And from what we've seen in the trailers, it looks really cool. I'm not even a multiplayer guy, especially with Metal Gear, and yet it actually looks cool. It actually looks like a fun way to build on the original game in a way that doesn't hurt the main story, doesn't hurt the main campaign. It's a totally separate mode, but it's like they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to go that far. In addition to having all of the fun extra content that the original Snake Eater had, like Snake versus Monkey, we get an entirely new multiplayer mode that's just going to be there. You know, they can add to the game without taking away from the stuff that was already in the original. It's smart. And again, all the changes they're making to the main story campaign is mostly just control stuff. You know, the gameplay and controls are going to be tweaked so that it plays more like Phantom Pain. You know, like being able to crouch and run at the same time, for example, you know, is something you couldn't do in the original Snake Eater. So lots of quality of life gameplay fixes like that. Lots of little things. Lots of little things to just make the game play better and play smoother, but like, yeah, they're not adding new bosses or taking away old ones. They're not cutting anything. They're not censoring anything, thank God. It's going to be Snake Eater. Like 100% the same game with new visuals and much tighter gameplay. Thank you. Thank you. Like, that's what I want some remakes to be. And again, I know the Silent Hill 2 remake turned out okay. I know it turned out fine. But yeah, I personally, to this day, think it would have been so much better if they gave Silent Hill 2 the same treatment they're giving Metal Gear Solid 3, because the original Silent Hill 2, to me, was still a much better game. It was a much tighter game, and I don't really get the mentality of people who are like, well, they gotta add new stuff so it feels like a new game, and it's like, see, at that point, why not just make a new game? Why not just make a new game? I mean, I know the last time we got a new Metal Gear game from Konami, a new original one, it was Metal Gear Survive, and that was garbage. Yeah, so I'm not saying that would be the best thing to do either, at least with Metal Gear. Because, again, unlike Silent Hill or whatever, where it was made by a lot of different people and it was a part of, like, different creators and stuff, you know, each Silent Hill game had like different directors or whatever. So like, even though it was one team, with Metal Gear, it really was Kojima's thing. So like, I don't really want Konami just kind of making their own like mock versions of Metal Gear that aren't really, they're not going to be like authentic, real Metal Gear games. They're not going to feel real to me if they're not written by Kojima and directed by him. But nevertheless, this, to me, is the next best thing Konami could have done. Just faithfully and respectfully as possible, recreate and, you know, shine up an older game. And Snake Eater, Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater really seems like, man, this is turning out to be like one of the best, most respectful remakes I've ever seen. I feel like when you're gonna remake something, the main goal, for me at least with a remake, should be to preserve. It should be about preservation. Now, unless that original game was really, really flawed or broken or, you know, could use a lot of improvements. Now, most of the time, unfortunately, much like the movie industry, when remakes get made, is usually for something that was already a big success or was already really good. So, like, it's rare that something that was deeply flawed gets a remake, which is a shame, because those are the best things to probably remake, you know? Like, again, the fact that Silent Hill 2 was remade before they went back and remade the original game, it's like, okay, I get it. Silent Hill 2 is the most critically acclaimed Silent Hill game of that franchise. But wouldn't it have made more sense to go back and start with the original? The original was the most flawed. It was the most dated. It was the one that needed the most care and updating. It's just weird, you know? That's what's frustrating about the whole remake topic, where it's like, what does make a proper remake? What is a proper video game remake, or remake in general? And for me, especially with video games where technology is always evolving and there is an opportunity to make a game look and feel better than it ever could have before, even though sometimes old controls and old graphics can be a part of a game's history, it can be a part of preserving a game's history. It's like the recent Onimusha 2 remaster or re-release that just came out that I actually started playing. You could argue that that's the better thing to do when it comes to preservation, because then you're just keeping, um, the game, even with its warts and wrinkles, you're keeping all that preserved because that is a part of its history. It was a PS2 game. It's like you kind of, if you change it to the point where it's not PS2 looking anymore, it doesn't have that old crust to it, then are you really preserving it? I mean, you could argue slapping an Unreal Engine 5 engine, those, I guess, incredible as it looks, onto Snake Eater, like you are erasing some of its history there. It's not a PS2 game anymore, so, you know, it's an interesting topic, because on one hand, I really love the fact that they updated the graphics in Unreal Engine 5, and it looks so cool. I'm sure I'll enjoy the hell out of playing it that way. But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, part of its charm and its history and my memories and nostalgia of playing it was the fact that it pushed the PS2 to its limits and looked as good as it did on PS2. Like, even the limitations of that time were part of its old charm. Blue Point's Metal Gear remakes, or remasters, whatever you want to call them, their HD versions of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 are actually severely flawed. They have weird glitches, delays when you call people on codec that are really weird, lighting issues. The higher frame rate for Snake Eater especially really fucks up the lip syncing, so characters look really weird when they're speaking. There's all sorts of visual problems and bugs and glitches with those Blue Point Metal Gear HD updates, and that's why I'm super happy, personally, super happy that Blue Point isn't doing the Snake Eater remake. I think there were rumors for a while. People thought that Blue Point was doing it, and I was like, oh, thank God they're not doing it. Their Demon Souls remake, especially, when they finally remade a game from the ground up. I mean, they did okay with Shadow of the Colossus, because that was still pretty close to the PS2 original aesthetically and visually. That was okay, but even that had some minor changes that were a little off-putting to me. But their Demon Souls remake was a travesty. It's really, really, it's almost criminal to me that that game reviewed so well and had so many great reviews and people praised it. If you really cared about the original Demon Souls or any of From Software's games and the way they do art style and the way they like use a game's environments and castles and dungeons to really like tell part of the lore and the history of its world, like, their art is very important to their games, and the Demon Souls remake, that's a good example to me of a bad remake, a really bad one, where they just said, fuck you, fuck the original art style and everything else. They redesigned everything in that game, the way the castles look, the way enemies look, the way certain NPCs look, the way certain bosses look and behave, to the point where, like, again, like, the lore and history and like environmental storytelling is so important in a From Software game, in a Dark Souls or whatever, and Demon Souls had that. Like, the visuals were very important to conveying like a sense of history and a sense of storytelling that wasn't through dialogue. So like the fact that they completely changed the art style, enemy designs, and everything in that game with no care whatsoever, no like respect for the original context of that game's art style, just shat all over it. Like, yeah, it's running on a much better graphics engine than the original Demon Souls, which was on PS3, but like, so what? It's shiny. I hate that company, I really do. They get way too much praise for what they do. And the funny thing is, they were screwing up their remasters even before they were doing full-on remakes. Even their HD remasters were terrible, and still getting praise from people. And I'm like, game journalists, rate Metal Gear ports that Blue Point put out, and they would just be like, oh man, I don't remember the codec taking this long to pop up when you call somebody. I guess it's just because it used to be on PS2 and those problems are still there. It's like, no, the PS2 version of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 didn't have that problem. The codec would pop up immediately and it was fast. It was fucking fast, bro. This is their version of the game. Their version is glitchy and buggy and has problems because they didn't optimize it properly. They're a shit company. Blue Point are hacks. They are hacks. And, you know, since this whole discussion is about remakes, I felt like I had to bring them up because they're the worst. But anyway, the team, luckily for us, the team behind the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake seem to really give a shit about remaking that game, and I'm very excited for it. I didn't think there were people at Konami who still gave that much of a shit, and it's very exciting to see that these people do. Now, obviously, it hasn't come out yet. We haven't played it yet. Hopefully, it runs and plays as well as it looks, because everything they're showing off looks fantastic. That's my thought on remakes, the subject of remakes. So what do you guys think about remaking games, remastering games, re-releasing games? What do you prefer? Do you like drastic, huge changes? Do you like when games keep things faithful? Do you like when it's just little tweaks like I do? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, you get to burning and live for the passion.